So we keep talking about the tissues, and our next type is the connective tissue. As we mentioned, connective tissue connects. There is a certain general structure, okay, like generic idea about the connective tissue and what it consists of. Any connective tissue would have the ground substance, which is just a bunch of proteins. Okay, in that ground substance, you're going to find fibers. Those fibers are made out of proteins like collagen, elastin, and a bunch of different proteins that form reticular fibers. Different tissues will have different proportions of collagen fibers, elastic fibers, and reticular fibers. Does that make sense? Now, when this proportion changes, obviously the structure of the tissue changes and the function of the tissue changes. Are we clear? Fibers and the ground substance together form extracellular matrix, okay, of the connective tissue. The fibers have also different features, different properties which define the properties of the tissue they're present in. For instance, collagen provides tissues with the integrity, structural integrity. You can find a lot of collagen in, surprisingly, bones. Okay? Elastic fibers obviously provide tissue with a certain degree of elasticity. The more elastic fibers there are, the more elastic the tissue is. Reticular fibers, which pretty much can be found only in one type of connective tissue, they form somewhat like a mesh, like a filter. Okay. Now, cellular components. The major cell of connective tissue is the fibroblast. The role of the fibroblast is to produce ground substance and fibers, pretty much recreate connective tissue. Does that make sense? Those are fibroblasts. And in addition to the fibroblasts, connective tissue may house a bunch of immune cells. And it does houses a bunch of immune cells. Can be lymphocytes, macrophages, neutrophils. All those cells, lymphocytes, macrophages, neutrophils, and you can see them in this picture to your left. Neutrophils and lymphocytes and star-shaped macrophages. They are responsible for the different components of immunity. Okay, that's all you have to know about those three. I don't really care which one is for adaptive, which one is for innate. We didn't even talk about immunity yet. Yes.
Just those three right there. Like, make sure that we list those for you.
Yeah. So if I tell you, you know, this this cell found in the connective tissue is the immune cell that protects us from pathogens. You know, lymphocyte, or neutrophil, and macrophage. Is that clear? Cool. Mast cells. Mast cells are the bad guys. Mast cells in the connective tissue are responsible for allergic reactions. When you have that itchy nose or you have hives, that's because of the mast cells degranulation. Know that they are responsible for allergy. Another very interesting type of connective tissue cell is the fat cell, adipocyte. The adipocyte represented here. The adipocyte is essentially a fibroblast that is terminally differentiated. You understand what it is? What I just said. Terminally differentiated. So what does that mean? Cell is differentiated. Huh? Yes. Say again? Yeah, so when fibroblasts become extremely specialized, they can specialize in being fat cells. Obviously, fat cells store energy in the form of fat, and they also cushion. That's actually a really important function. Cushion. Protect. Now there are connective tissue has the most types. You know, you will have to learn a lot of types of connective tissue, but as we mentioned during the first class, how do you eat an elephant? Piece by piece, one bite at a time. So instead of trying to memorize all 10 or 11 types of connective tissue that you need to know, I suggest we will break connective tissue down to several classes, and then we'll break each class further. First of all, in all those different kinds of connective tissue, we can isolate and highlight so-called connective tissue proper. What do you think proper means? When we say connective tissue proper.
Tissue that definitely connects something up, like, instead of something like loosely connects like blood.
Okay, good, very good. So when we say connective tissue proper, we mean like real connective tissue, true connective tissue. Okay? It's not proper actually. Well, tendon is, yes. Tendon is a true connective tissue, yes. Mixed up with cartilage. So there is a connective tissue proper, and we're going to talk about connective tissue proper first. There are two subtypes of connective tissue proper: loose and dense. Do you follow me so far? And there are three types of each. Three types of loose connective tissue proper and three types of dense. The first tissue that we're talking about is the loose areolar tissue. You can see it in this micrograph right here. You can see a bunch of loosely, located elastic fibers, loose fibroblasts, thicker collagen fibers. Okay, and the function, areolar tissue can be found practically everywhere. It wraps around pretty much every organ. Its major function is to cushion. If there is an inflammation, it's most likely in the areolar connective tissue. There is an infiltration of white blood cells, areolar connective tissue. Does that make sense? So again, everywhere, under epithelium is areolar connective tissue. And we will look at different tissues during our next class. It happens every time. Students take the slide with areolar connective tissue and then tell me, cannot find it. There's some dirt on the slide. It is not dirt. That's how areolar connective tissue looks like dirt. Okay, it's very unremarkable. Okay? Adipose connective tissue is also loose. That is fat. You can see the micrograph of adipose connective tissue with the large adipocytes that are filled with fat. They are so filled with fat that nucleus is squished, to the side. Obviously, adipocytes can be found everywhere there's fat. To kind of give you sort of a sneak peek, fat can be found. There are two major types of fat. Well, we're counting breasts. Okay, let's say three. Breast is sort of a separate fat that's, it pretty much forms most of the breast tissue. Now, in general, we have subcutaneous fat and we have abdominal fat. What does subcutaneous mean? What do you think? Under the skin. So if you pinch your skin, you pinch the fat as well. Another type of fat is abdominal. It's the fat that surrounds your abdominal organs. Okay? And if you will gut someone and open up the belly, you will see organ covered in fat. You may often see people, it's most common in men, more common in men rather than in women. Men, they look pretty fit otherwise, but they have these large bellies, okay, like really large extended bellies. That is because of the abdominal fat inside of the abdominal cavity. And I've heard from several medical students that when they first saw the autopsy of the person who has a lot of abdominal fat, it's shocking how much fat is wrapping around the intestines. It's like an apron made of fat. Interestingly enough, subcutaneous fat and abdominal fat have different features. For instance, if you would compare the body composition of a woman and a man, men have less subcutaneous fat, may have less subcutaneous fat than females. Females in general have more body fat, but most of their body fat is subcutaneous fat. In terms of the health implications, abdominal fat is bad. You know how, well, I'm going to give you a certain number and I want you to keep it in mind. 2/3 of the US population are overweight. 1/3 of the US population are obese. So half of overweight people are not just overweight, they are obese. And obesity brings with it a lot of health problems, hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, cardiac problems, metabolic problems, mostly sugar metabolism problems. But it is pretty interesting that abdominal fat, it makes the biggest impact on your well-being. Subcutaneous fat is often considered a healthy one. Okay? So women have more healthy fat than men. Men accumulate abdominal fat much faster. We don't know the exact mechanisms. Maybe it's hormonal, maybe something else. We don't know why it happens. Also, women have, on average, women have more fat than men. Why? Babies. So what about babies? Huh? From what? There you go. It stores energy. Because, look, men are dispensable. Seriously, after the conception, you can get rid of them. Females have to carry the baby and give birth to a baby. I'm talking about completely biological standpoint, don't take me wrong. I'm not suggesting to eliminate all humans in the end. So, women have to provide for a baby. So their survival is more critical. And that extra fat provides extra energy in case of hunger. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because like a lot of times they will not be hungry. They won't break. It will be certain times and then they'll gorge and then it just depends on, I guess, the pregnancy.
Well, you're talking about each single case, but in general, from the evolutionary standpoint, having extra fat sort of provides sort of a savings account and insurance for survival over time. Does that make sense? So that is one of the reasons why probably the main reason why females on average have higher body fat content than males. loose reticular connective tissue. Okay, it can be found exclusively in the lymphoid organs, and you can see here there's a bunch of white blood cells and a bunch of reticular fibers. So lymphoid organs meaning lymph nodes, spleen. Okay, now what happens in that loose reticular connective tissue when lymph flows through the say lymph nodes? These reticular fibers form a mesh that filters out all different kinds of crap. Okay, this different kinds of crap stays in the lymph nodes, and your immune system now has time to respond to it. Does that make sense? So we've got three types of loose connective tissue proper: areolar, adipose, and reticular. Know the location, know the function. Clear? Let's move on. Dense connective tissue proper. Also three types. Regular, a lot of collagen fibers. Remember what I told you about collagen. Collagen provides mechanical resilience to the tissues. So these collagen fibers that can be found in the dense regular connective tissue, they are oriented sort of in the same direction. Okay, they are parallel. Does that make sense? You're going to find them in different types of tendons and ligaments. Okay, if you would look at Arnold right there, you can see the large assembly of ligaments in the front of the knee. Same goes with Arnold's right there. That's dense regular connective tissue. You see on the right side of his head, the white covering, or that model, that female figure on the right, the white covering, that's called aponeurosis. It's also a tendon. Okay, tendons and ligaments. Now if you think about it, they are very resilient to the force that is applied along the fibers. Does that make sense? I mean, if you try to rip my hand out of the glenohumeral joint, it's going to be pretty hard. Tendons will hold it. You will probably dislocate it, but spraining a tendon requires a lot of force. But if you apply this force not along the fibers, but at an angle, you can just rip it. Make sense? So they withstand a lot of tension along one direction. Okay? One direction. On the other hand, irregular dense connective tissue, okay, it has collagen fibers that are oriented somewhat chaotically, right? So it will form structures that must withstand forces pulling on it in all possible directions. For instance, joint capsules, fibrous capsules of the joints. Okay, but it's the shoulder joint, like here, or elbow joint. Those capsules have to withstand pulling forces in every direction. Interestingly enough, one of your skin layers is also composed of the dense, irregular connective tissue. Because if you think about it, your skin withstands pulling forces in all directions and doesn't really rip. Am I clear? Awesome. Skin, one of the layers in the skin, specifically it's the reticular layer of the dermis, is dense, irregular connective tissue, because your skin withstands pulling forces, right? Like muscles expand and skin starts to be pulled in all directions, all at the same time. It has withstand those forces. It has not to be ripped apart. Okay. And finally, elastic. Well, the name kind of explains itself. So dense elastic connective tissue is elastic, contains a lot of elastic fibers, okay? And the two most important locations that I want you to be aware of are stretchable, dilatable tubes, the bronchi and large arteries. Think about this. The bronchi can dilate and can constrict. Your arteries can dilate and can constrict. That connective tissue that can be found in the walls of both arteries and bronchi first gives them enough mechanical resilience, and in addition to that, allows them to expand and contract because it's elastic. Does that make sense? Awesome. Now, before we move on to cartilage, so far we have covered 3 types of loose connective tissue proper, areolar, adipose, and reticular, and 3 types of dense connective tissue proper, regular, irregular, and elastic. Cartilage is another example of connective tissue. Classification-wise, it is now not a connective tissue proper. It's a little bit farther. Still connective tissue, but it lives in its own right, okay? So there are 3 types of cartilage, and we're going to start with the hyaline, which is the most abundant. A lot of collagen fibers. You cannot really see them. So, yes. Sure.
So you had 3 types of common connective, 3 types of connective tissue proper, and that was the
So we have 3 types of loose connective tissue proper. It's areolar, adipose, and reticular. 3 types of adipose and reticular. And 3 types of dense connective tissue proper. So regular, irregular, and elastic. Okay, good. Now we go into cartilage, and we talk about hyaline 1. First of all, the cells that produce ground substance and extracellular matrix in general in cartilage are not fibroblasts. There are special types of cells that are called chondroblasts or chondrocytes. Chondroblasts differentiate, become chondrocytes. You can see chondrocytes in the empty pockets inside of the cartilage. Those empty pockets are called lacunae. So there are a lot of collagen fibers in there, and the extracellular matrix in the cartilage is pretty dense. Okay. Functionally, cartilage sometimes connects bones, supports bones, reinforces, cushions. Okay. Hyaline cartilage is sort of a jack of all trades. So it's pretty decent in terms of, withstanding tensile forces. It's pretty decent in terms of withstanding pressure, but keep in mind that I used the adjective pretty decent. Okay? Jack of all trades, master of none. So embryonic skeleton starts as the hyaline cartilage. Then this cartilage skeleton ossifies, becomes, turns into the bone, not directly. It covers the ends of the bone. If you would look at Marvin, right in that corner, like the ends of the bones that form joints, for instance, the proximal end of the humerus, as in shoulder, is covered in hyaline cartilage. Okay, distal end of the humerus is covered in a hyaline cartilage too. Okay, ribs are connected to the sternum by the hyaline cartilage. Trachea to a large extent, tracheal cartilage is what actually forms trachea. If you would look at trachea, it's the cycles of cartilage. The Adam's apple right here, it's a thyroid cartilage, which is also hyaline. Okay? Does that make sense? Adam's apple is the hyaline. So the name, anatomical name of that particular structure that you feel here is thyroid cartilage. Type-wise, it's hyaline. Does that make sense? Now, elastic cartilage is, guess what? Elastic. Contains a lot of elastic fibers. Okay? You can find it in essentially 3 locations. 1, 2, and I cannot show you my epiglottis. Okay? It's the little fragment of the cartilage that closes your larynx when you swallow, preventing food from getting into the larynx and trachea. Does that make sense? So those are only 3 places in the human body where you can find elastic cartilage. Finally, fibrocartilage. So this has a lot of thick collagen fibers. Okay, much smaller lacunae, right? And this type of cartilage, fibrous cartilage, or fibrocartilage, can resist the pressure very well. It withstands enormous pressure forces. There are very few types, very few places in the human body where you can see feel a lot of pressure. First and foremost, intervertebral discs. If you would look at those models of vertebral column in the side, especially right one, you see those gray bluish discs between the vertebrae. Those are intervertebral discs. The pressure that they can withstand is pretty significant. Those of you who exercise and do heavy lifting, you can only imagine how much weight the lumbar portion of your vertebral column has to carry when you stand with the weight. All this weight, all this pressure goes on those vertebral discs, and they can withstand it pretty well. I don't think you can possibly lift the weight that would destroy them. If you do it wrong way, that's a different story, but if you just stand straight, they can withstand an enormous amount of weight. Yes?
Some of the guys I worked out with we were over in Germany, and the guy's knees gave out like when we were deadlifting because he went up, his knees gave out before his back.
Yes, that's another place. You just mentioned, so I was going to say meniscus of the knee. Okay? Now meniscus, well, Marvin is too far, and how are we going to call this? Whoa, don't fall on me. This gentleman. What's his name? No, that's Marvin. Let's call him Melvin. Melvin, okay. So if you look at Melvin here, meniscus is the layer of the cartilage. There are 2 menisci, okay, the medial menisci and lateral menisci, that provide additional feet of the condyles of the femur and condyles of the tibia. Make sense? Now, when you do lifting and start sort of shaking in your knees, instead of going perfectly proper, this movement, the lateral movement, may damage the meniscus and may tear the meniscus, and then the knee gives up. Okay, knees are pretty stable, but for vertical load, With any lateral blow, well, medial blow I can hardly imagine, but lateral blow will just kill them. Okay, lateral movement, they're not designed for lateral movement. Does that make sense? So we've got intervertebral discs, we've got menisci. Third place, quite surprisingly, is right here, between your hip bones. Okay? You cannot see it in this picture, but I don't know if I can lift Melvin, but here, your hip bones, if you think about it, the weight of your entire upper body relies on the hip bones. And that pressure pushes them together. Okay? And that joint, called pubic symphysis, is where you can find fibrous cartilage as well, because there's a lot of pressure there. Does that make sense? Yes, go ahead. Great question. It is connected, but it's a little stretchable. The hip bones during the delivery, they do not separate, but they stretch somewhat. But they come back together. Okay? Make sense? Moving on. So we've got three types of cartilage: hyaline, elastic, and fibrous. Bone, another type of connective tissue. Please. Bone is connective tissue. It's not a separate type of tissue. It is connective tissue, right? A lot of collagen. Actually, it looks somewhat like a cartilage. Okay, you can see the individual cells, the osteocytes, located in the lacunae. Okay, bone is pretty heavily vascularized, actually. Those openings here, called central canal, that's where the blood vessels are. Okay, and the extracellular matrix consists of collagen fibers, but the ground substance, which contains proteins by itself, is calcified, mineralized. That's why your bone is so hard. Okay, the salts of calcium is what makes your bone hard. So what's going to happen if you don't have enough calcium in your diet? Osteoporosis. Well, usually it's called mostly osteomalacia, because when osteoporosis is the disease that affects primarily females, males to a lesser extent, and is associated with hormonal changes with age. It can be prevented by elevating calcium in the diet, but not completely. But if you are adult and you try to completely abstain from calcium, your bones will become not only brittle, they become soft. And if you would look, if you Google severe osteomalacia, you will see people that pretty much squished by the gravity. Their bones are deformed, their bodies are deformed. Okay? In kids, have you heard about rickets? So rickets often, and some physicians suggest that rickets affects every kid to a different extent, because when they grow, the age of 2, 3, 4, they grow so fast that they physically cannot acquire sufficient amount of calcium from the diet. It's inevitable. They will have certain degree of softness in the bones. Okay? Make sense? Well, functionally, it supports, protects, stores minerals, it houses bone marrow, which produces blood cells, like all kinds of stuff. Does that make sense? That's your bone. Also connective tissue. Blood is connective tissue itself. There's a lot of cells. The ground substance for the blood is essentially plasma. So this is your ground substance. And it has a lot of immune cells, well, red blood cells. It doesn't have fibroblasts or anything that is similar to it, but tell me that it doesn't connect. It connects everything. Every organ in your body is connected to all other organs by blood. Make sense? So, question? Go ahead. Not in this class. If you want to test your blood types, come to my microbiology class. We're doing that. Okay. We're doing a lot of other fun stuff as well, like sheet sampling. Now, to kind of sum up with the connective tissue. Connective tissue proper. Let me do something here. I don't know if it's going to work, but we'll try. It doesn't make me any smarter. A smart notebook. Come on, dude. I shouldn't have done that. I just want to kind of make a sketch with you so you can see how you can draw it and classify it, okay? I don't know how long will it take. Oh, screw that. I want it to be in the YouTube video, so that's the only reason. Why does it load that many pages? Oh, there we go. Okay. So we've got, come on, connective tissue, right? So we have proper, which can be what? Two types. Loose and dense. Loose can be areolar, adipose, and reticular. Dense can be regular, irregular, and elastic. Does that make sense? You have cartilage, which can be hyaline, elastic, and fibrous. You have blood, and you have bone. Remember I told you about drawing things? That's sort of an example what I suggest you do. Okay? So just, you can do it. Look, I mean, I understand it's unfair, I know, but you can do it in like a couple of minutes. On the like piece of paper, on the napkin, on the paper towel, okay? You can throw it away, just practice. And then if you want, you can take a larger piece of paper and just start writing in, you know, functions and whatnot. Does that make sense? It kind of gives you a perspective. It gives a structure to your concepts. Right? It's all on the YouTube. Don't worry about it. Muscle tissue. There are three types. Skeletal, which is the only voluntary controlled muscle type, and well, to a certain extent, well, we can vouch for nervous system also being voluntarily controlled, but it's the only voluntarily controlled muscle, skeletal, responsible for movement. I mean body movement, locomotion. Okay, striated. You can see those little stripes on the surface of the muscle. It's they're called striations. Okay, cells are multinucleated because they are multiple cells that at a certain point fused together, and the cells are straight unbranched fibers. Does that make sense? Skeletal muscles contract fast. If you think about your movements, it's really fast contraction. I'm not going to tell you where they are, where skeletal muscle is located. It's located in skeletal muscle. Clear? Cardiac. Contraction is slower, and it is, of course, involuntary controlled. Cells of the cardiac muscle are branched. You can see the branching. And they generally have one nucleus. They are also striated, as skeletal are. Does that make sense? Obviously, cardiac muscle can be found in the heart. And smooth muscle, cells are non-striated, shaped like a spindle. Each cell has its individual nucleus, and you can find smooth muscles around kind of tubes. Not only there, but mostly, okay? Like stomach or intestine or ureter or walls of the bladder or gallbladder. Does that make sense? Everywhere you need the contraction of the tube. Everywhere you need propulsion. Smooth muscles contract slowly. Now, before we move to the last type of tissue, summary for the muscles. Skeletal, fast contracting, voluntary, striated, unbranched, long cells. And the only way you can stimulate skeletal muscle is by nerves. Cardiac, involuntary contractions, branched cells, also striated, can be stimulated via nervous stimuli, hormonal stimuli, chemical stimuli, mechanical stimuli, not only nervous, okay? Which pretty much means you can rip the heart out of someone and it will still beat, okay? And its contractions are slower. Finally, smooth muscles, involuntary, controlled, non-striated. Each cell has its own nucleus. Contract slow, can be stimulated by nerves, hormones, chemicals, mechanical stimuli. Okay? For muscles, control, stimulus, nervous or more than that, and structural features, striations, yes or no. Number of nuclei, branching. Does that make sense? Okay. The last one, nervous. That's easy. Obviously, I'm not going to ask you where it's located on the exam. That would be just giving you a question for free. It's located in the nervous system. Nerves, brain, spinal cord. Okay. Now, there are two major types of cells in the nervous system. So, neuron, you can see the neuron here. Okay, and glia. You can see the nuclei of the glial cells, those little tiny dots. Now, neurons have sort of extensions on them. Some extensions are called dendrites. That's where the neurons receive the signal. Some extensions are called axons. That's through which they relay the signal. You don't have to know dendrites and axons yet. That's the next topic, the nervous system. But so far, understand that, neurons are responsible for the signal transmission. Does that make sense? Am I clear in that? Okay. Glials, if neurons are responsible for the signal transmission, what's the function of the glial cell then? It's like how many people are in Metallica? There are 4. How does the tour look like? A bunch of buses. Why? There are many people that help them to kick ass, right? So glial cells help neurons to kick ass. Glial cells make sure that neurons function properly. They maintain the, they nourish them, they protect them. Some types of glial cells insulate them electrically. Some types of glial cells protect them from pathogens. Glial cells is the supporting stuff. Okay, neurons are the top performers. Am I clear? I'm going to wrap it up now.